Controlling the python population here in Florida. Governor DeSantis spoke in Stewart today about some new actions the state plans to take to control the growth of those pythons in the Everglades.
For years, Florida's swamps have been the setting of countless wildlife mysteries, but recent footage captured something far more unsettling than anyone expected. What began as a battle against one notorious invader has uncovered a chain reaction spreading through the Everglades, affecting creatures far beyond the original threat. As researchers looked closer, they found evidence of a growing crisis hidden beneath the surface. And the most surprising part is that the aftermath may be changing Florida's wilderness in ways nobody saw coming. How one released pet turned Florida into a wildlife nightmare. Long before the crisis made headlines, the Florida Everglades was one of the most remarkable ecosystems in North America. Often called a river of grass, this vast wetland supported an incredible variety of wildlife and played a vital role in the state's environment. Countless species depended on its delicate balance, creating a natural system that had evolved over thousands of years. But that balance would eventually face a threat few people saw coming. The story traces back to a combination of human decisions and unfortunate timing. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida, leaving widespread destruction in its wake. Among the damaged properties was a reptile breeding facility, where reports suggested that large exotic snakes escaped into nearby habitats. At the same time, another problem was quietly unfolding across the state. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Burmese pythons became popular pets. Many owners purchased them when they were small and manageable, unaware that these snakes could grow into massive predators. As the animals became larger, stronger, and more difficult to care for, some owners made a decision that would have lasting consequences. Rather than finding proper homes for them, they released the snakes into the wild. What seemed like an isolated problem soon became something much larger. The Everglades turned out to be the perfect environment for Burmese pythons. Warm temperatures, abundant water, and an endless supply of prey allowed them to thrive. Hidden among dense vegetation and muddy waterways, the snakes were almost impossible to detect. Equipped with heat-sensing abilities and remarkable camouflage, they became highly effective hunters in an ecosystem that had never evolved to deal with predators like them. As the years passed, their numbers exploded. Researchers began noticing alarming changes across the wetlands. Animals that had once been common were becoming increasingly difficult to find. Populations of raccoons, opossums, and bobcats dropped dramatically in some areas. Roads that once offered frequent wildlife sightings suddenly felt empty. The disappearance of these animals created ripple effects throughout the food chain, altering relationships between predators, prey, and the environment itself. By the time officials fully understood the scale of the invasion, the problem had already grown beyond a simple solution. Estimates suggested that the python population had reached into the hundreds of thousands across southern Florida. Removing them would prove far more difficult than anyone imagined. State agencies, scientists, and wildlife experts launched one effort after another to slow the invasion. Public hunting challenges attracted hundreds of participants, while professional snake hunters spent years tracking and removing thousands of pythons. Advanced technology, including thermal drones and tracking programs, was also brought into the fight. Yet despite the effort, the results remained frustratingly small compared to the size of the population. For every python removed, countless others remained hidden deep within the wetlands. And while Florida focused its attention on the giant snakes taking over the Everglades, researchers were about to uncover something even more troubling. The invasion had brought more than just a predator into the ecosystem. Hidden within the pythons was another threat, one far smaller, but potentially just as destructive. The hidden invader nobody saw coming. The Burmese python was viewed as the Everglades' biggest problem. Its rapid spread had already transformed large parts of the ecosystem, wiping out many native mammals and challenging every effort to control its population. But as troubling as that invasion was, researchers eventually discovered that the snakes had brought something else with them, something far more difficult to detect. Unlike the pythons, this new threat couldn't be spotted moving through the grass or swimming across the wetlands. It was hidden inside the snakes themselves. Scientists became alarmed after finding that several native snake species were unusually weak, thin, and suffering from serious health problems. As researchers looked deeper into the issue, they discovered a troubling cause, a parasite called the snake lungworm, which was likely introduced to Florida by invasive Burmese pythons. The situation was particularly concerning because pythons had evolved with this parasite and could tolerate its presence. Native Florida snakes, however, had no previous exposure to it, leaving them far more susceptible to infection and its harmful effects. The parasite spreads through a surprisingly effective cycle. Eggs released into the environment can be consumed by insects, such as cockroaches. Those insects are then eaten by frogs and lizards, which eventually become prey for native snakes. Once inside a new host, the parasite begins a dangerous journey through the body, eventually reaching the lungs where it grows and reproduces. The effects can be devastating. Researchers found infected snakes with airways crowded by parasites, making it increasingly difficult for them to breathe. As the infection worsened, many became too weak to hunt effectively. Some suffered severe internal damage, while others slowly starved as their health deteriorated. What began as a hidden infection was now becoming a serious threat to multiple native species. Even more concerning was the fact that the parasite no longer seemed dependent on Burmese pythons to survive. It had successfully established itself within native wildlife and was spreading through the ecosystem on its own. That meant the problem could continue growing even if python numbers were reduced. The Everglades had already been hit by one ecological disaster. Now, a second wave was unfolding beneath the surface, affecting animals many people never realized were at risk. And with scientists struggling to stop the spread, Florida found itself searching for an answer in an unexpected place: a native predator that had nearly vanished from the landscape decades earlier. Florida's risky plan that started changing the story. As invasive pythons continued spreading across South Florida and a dangerous parasite worked its way through native wildlife, it became clear that quick fixes were not going to save the Everglades. Years of hunting programs, tracking efforts, and experimental solutions had produced only limited results. Faced with a growing ecological crisis, conservationists turned their attention to a much longer-term strategy, one that initially sounded unbelievable to many people. The plan involved releasing snakes back into the wild. To the public, the idea seemed completely backwards. Florida was already struggling with an overwhelming snake problem. So why would anyone think adding more snakes could possibly help? Critics feared it could become another environmental mistake. After all, history is filled with examples of well-intentioned wildlife introductions that ended in disaster. But this was not about introducing a foreign species. It was about restoring one that had belonged there all along. The eastern indigo snake once played an important role throughout the southeastern United States. As the longest native snake in North America, it was a powerful predator known for feeding on a variety of animals, including other snakes. For generations, it helped maintain balance within its ecosystem. However, habitat loss, declining gopher tortoise populations, and decades of environmental change pushed the species into serious decline. By the late 1970s, it had become officially threatened across parts of its range. For years, conservation groups worked behind the scenes to reverse that trend. Breeding programs were established, habitats were restored, and efforts were made to protect the ecosystems the indigo snake depended on. The goal was not simply to save one species. It was to rebuild pieces of an ecological network that had been unraveling for decades. Then came an encouraging breakthrough. In North Florida, researchers began releasing captive-bred indigo snakes into protected habitats and carefully monitoring their progress. The real test was whether these animals could survive and reproduce without human assistance. For a while, nobody knew if the project would succeed. Then, in 2023, something remarkable appeared on wildlife cameras. Young indigo snakes were spotted moving through the landscape without tracking tags. These were not recently released animals. They had been born in the wild. For the first time in nearly 50 years, eastern indigo snakes were reproducing naturally in parts of Florida, where they had long been absent. It was a sign that restoration efforts were working and that damaged ecosystems could still recover when given the chance. At the same time, native predators such as bobcats, alligators, and Florida panthers were beginning to show that they could adapt to the presence of invasive pythons. The battle for the Everglades is far from over, and many challenges remain. But after years of setbacks, Florida's swamps revealed something few expected to see. Not just survival, but the first signs that nature may finally be fighting back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to check out the next video on your screen.